Thinking Chairman Ball,
Here.
Vice Chairman Dibble, Commissioner Schrader,
Here.
Commissioners Archimedes,
Here.
Commissioner Miller,
Here.
Cap, there's an echo. Yeah, we know.
Okay, I think I'm trying to mute folks. Okay, I think it's okay, guys. So you got to make sure and mute all of your mics.
Especially if they have double the.
Okay, test. Is there an echo still? Okay, so I think we nailed down the echo. Where did we leave off?
okay, left off at Michael York,
Here.
Javier Gonzalez, Brian Mandel, and Commissioner Salazar Garza.
Here.
Quorum established.
Thank you. Moving
This
on
is
to-
Dan Dibble. By the way, I was having connection problems. I'm here.
Okay, gotcha.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Moving on to item 3, approval of absences for Commissioner Salazar Garza. Do I have a motion and a second?
Commissioner Schrader, I'll make a motion that we approve the absences for the prior meeting.
This Vice
Michael,
Chairman
I'll
Dibble, I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes. Moving on. Approval of minutes from the last meeting. Do I have a motion and a second or any comments?
Commissioner Schrader, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes as presented.
Commissioner Miller, I second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to the consent public hearing items. A, new plats.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This, for the record, this is Andrew Demas with Development Services reading in tonight's consent agenda. Starting with item number 2, Idea Bell Street Subdivision, Block 1, Lot 1, a final of 15.424 acres. Item number 3, Laguna Acres, Block 5, Lot 15B, a final replat of 0.2 acres. Item number 4, Loki Subdivisions, Tract A2A and A2B, a Lot 4, final replat of 1.72 acres. Item number 5, which in a moment I'll expand upon, but just to read it in first, is Kings Lake West preliminary of 284 acres. This is a conditional approval. And then item number 6 under time extension, Westwood Heights Unit 4 final of 9.06 acres. This is their third request. According to the applicant, they're waiting on council action for a potential reimbursement. Now, going back to item number 5, just for the benefit of the commissioners. So today a new development has occurred on this particular project. As you'll see on the screen, this is the entire 284 acres. At this center boulevard that I'm identifying on the screen, to the north, this entire northern portion has now been sold from Mr. Tamez to now George Mastagasi. So this conditional approval does affect essentially a save and accept, no longer counting this portion of the preliminary plat. And that's something we just discovered a number of hours ago. Now, as it is a conditional approval, the original condition for the plat is that the C1 collector along this portion of the property would have to be built at the, once 50% of the preliminary plat had been built out. So with this portion no longer being on the table, since it's no longer owned by Mr. Tamez, it would essentially be 50% of this only remaining southern portion, which would trigger the construction of the C1 collector along the western property line. The second condition now, because of that sale, again, it would have, this preliminary plat would need to be amended to only show the property that is owned by Mr. Tamez. So while we can say save and accept tonight, we would need to have an amended preliminary plat submitted, only identifying this portion of the property. And then 3, the center boulevard would need to be fully built as part of Mr. Tamez's property. We wouldn't want to split this 100-foot right-of-way. So as I zoom in, we wouldn't want to split this in half and have it between 2 developers. It would be beneficial to have it under one developer. So this would now be included, the entire right-of-way, as part of Mr. Tamez's property. Those are the 3 conditions as part of this conditional approval. So I realize it's kind of a lot to take in. So if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to go over them either on any of the items on the consent agenda.
Okay, at this time, I will, just for the record, Michael York will be abstaining from item 4. I want to note that now. Is the applicant for item 5, Mr. Tamez, is he aware of all these conditions?
We do have the applicant's representative, Mr. Coyne, on the line. And I believe Mr. Tamez is with him in his office.
And they can run.
That's correct, Andrew. This is Jeff Coyne, John Tamez, and Belda Tamez are here with me as well.
Thank you. And we will open up for public hearing shortly, so thank you. Okay, any questions for staff regarding items 2 through 6?
So this is Commissioner Schrader. I have a few questions for Mr. Demas on item 5. So
Let's request they remove it.
Okay, thank you, Nida. So just a point of information, I should say a point of order. If we could remove item 5 off the consent agenda and move that separately, just so we don't hold up 2, 3, 4, and 6, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair.
That would be fine. Commissioner Schrader, can we hold your comment for a moment, please?
Sure.
All right, at this
Thank you.
time, we will move item 5 off consent to the public hearing portion. So at this time, do I have any questions for 2, 3, 4, or 6 for staff? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing for items 2, 3, 4, and 6 at this time. Andrew, do we have any comments on email or?
No, sir. No public comments were submitted for any of the items on tonight's consent agenda.
Thank you. Do we have any comments from the public or anybody on the line regarding items 2, 3, 4, or 6? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and entertain a motion for items 2, 3, and 6.
Commissioner
Michael
Miller,
York.
I move that we approve items 2, 3, and 6 as presented.
Michael
Hey, do I
York,
have a
I'll
second?
second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item 4. Do I have a motion for item 4?
This is Commissioner Schrader. I'll make a motion we approve item 4 as submitted.
Thank you.
Commissioner
That's fine.
Salazar, second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Now moving on to public hearing B, and we'll hear item 5 first, Andrew. Well, we've already heard it. I
Yes.
guess we need to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did wanted to add one thing to item 5 as far as options before the Planning Commission. And that is option 1, you can table the plat. Option 2, you can vote denial. Or option 3, you can continue on with the save and accept and approval with the conditions. And with the tabling, you would need to request that the applicant waive the 30-day requirement, which has to do with the state shot clock.
Andrew. At this time, do any commissioners have any questions for staff?
This is
Commissioner
Commissioner Schrader. I have a few questions regarding this. So, okay, from what I was reading in the submission, the county road or the conditional approval of the original proposed thing was conditional because that encumbered them to construct County Road 43 to the collector requirements. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, so that is contingent upon, in other words, no more than 50% of the lots could be built out prior to that construction being complete.
Correct,
Or is
50%,
that
the
prior,
50%.
prior to initiating.
Correct. The 50% threshold would kick in for final plat. So on the original application, it would have been, let's say the northern half was completed. Once that was completed, until the C1 collector is built, no further final plats would be approved or recorded. Now, with the kind of the wrinkle added in about the sale, technically that means that now the 50% threshold is 25% of the original plat, since only 50% is now owned by Mr. Tamez.
Okay. Now to a couple of questions regarding this new wrinkle of related to the sale of the property. So you mentioned the boulevard would need to be fully constructed by Mr. Tamez. If for any reason the other half, in other words, is the other developer, the other purchaser, if they proceed faster, are they encumbered on this to make sure this boulevard is built out?
What will occur is the points of access required for fire. So if development occurs and they do not have enough points of access based on the number of homes constructed, then yes, they would be responsible for constructing the road to gain that requirement.
Okay. So that, in other words, I mean, there's a possibility that that if for any reason one property or one development was delayed slower than the other one, then effectively the other one becomes encumbered to complete that to create the fire access.
Correct. And I think the other addition to that I want to say is that the northern half could completely change in design since we haven't received what exactly Mr. Mastagassi's intention are. So
yeah,
it's hard to make a decision based off of just what's been submitted, since that northern half could completely go away or, you know, never be built technically.
Okay. Okay. So then how do you, if the full boulevard needs to be built, then what happens with you? Well, I guess that brings on a lot of questions, but.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I guess I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff?
Yeah, Andrew, this is Michael York. Just a procedural question. You mentioned the 30-day shot clock. I understood that applied to final plats, but I guess does it apply to the preliminary plat as well, even though that doesn't get recorded?
It's the tabling. So if any item by planning commission is tabled, we would just want to make sure that the applicant is aware and that they're willing to waive that requirement.
So is that a different requirement than the state law for platting or the public hearing, or is that the same requirement that you're talking about? I just want to make sure I understood that.
It's the same requirement. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I was trying to get it off of mute. Okay, at this time, are there any other questions for staff?
I do have a question. Andrew, going back to that 100 feet boulevard, that is the responsibility of the current owner, I assume, correct? If I'm understanding correctly.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
there's a lot of unknowns here, and if we prove this kind of a plat, like let's say the person that recently have bought it does not develop this for a while, and Mr. Tamez responsible to build this boulevard. If they sell piece of it, what I'm kind of lost here because it just I want to understand exactly whose responsibility it would be to build that boulevard.
So at this point, so then you're asking the exact same questions we were asking internally as we found out this sale had occurred. So obviously the boulevard is needed, and we wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be split between two developers. And now you're dealing with a half street situation that we've all encountered in other plats. I'm sure all of us know the horror stories of what happens when you split this type of boulevard, that you may not have the same quality, you may have different contractors, it may not get built. There could be an argument between developers and then nothing gets built. So
exactly.
We wanted to make sure that someone is going to build the boulevard first. And then two, it's what we're stuck with is we didn't want to just simply pull the item off the agenda. We wanted to give the plat a fair chance to move forward as potentially approved with conditions. But in all technicality, technically it's changed to the fact that this property that's on the preliminary is no longer owned by the applicant. So it puts us in a bit of a predicament to do this save and accept to keep the plat alive. But that is why one of the conditions is they will need to submit a new preliminary plat.
And if I may ask this question, and that is if the future developer or Mastagasis use the same plat as it is shown here, because they could definitely use a different plat that could change things up. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That is absolutely correct. That is a fair statement.
Wow. Okay. And then real quick on that C1 collector road that needs to be built on that 43, whose responsibility is that? The developer or?
So before we found out about this sale, the discussion was that there's going to be a split between three parties for the construction of a county road standard along the western property boundary. But our concern is with the level of traffic that's going to be generated, obviously the demand is going to be there for a C1 collector level road. So that is why we set as a condition a 50% threshold. So imagine this sale never happened, once half the development had been finished and finalized out, that is when the trigger would occur to build the rest of the collector along the western property line. But that's no longer on the table. So now we have to make that 50% threshold of what is currently owned by the applicant. That's why I know it's confusing when I say 25%, 50%, but essentially imagine if you're looking at the screen, when this southern half hits 50% of development, that is when the C1 collector will be required according to the conditions we set.
And
Otherwise,
how long does that collector? Is it just the length of their property, or is it the full length?
It's a mile. Sorry.
and that's the other quandary, is that this property is set so far away from farm to market road 43 way out Weber that connection has to occur all the way down. So that C1 collector is roughly about a mile long between FM 43 and the southern edge of the property line right here. So it's a bit of a distance.
Because it goes all the way to the property that the people in the front of Mr. Tamez own, all the way to Weber, which is FM 43. Is that correct?
Correct.
Any other questions before we open up and hear from the applicant?
This Commissioner Miller, just to be clear, this sale is already completely closed, done deal?
Yes, sir. So the rezoning application was submitted by Mr. Mastagasi for the northern half. And with that application, he enclosed a warranty deed recorded as of Monday, May 7th.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, at this time, we will open the public hearing for item 5. If the applicant is available.
We are here. This is Jeff Coyne, and I've got John Tomez and Belda Tomez with me. We have no comments, just here to answer any questions you may have on the preliminary plat.
Thank you. Planning commissioners, any questions?
This is Commissioner Schrader. Jeff, how do you guys see, constructing these, the boulevard and, County Road 43 with respect to, accommodating the previous section of property if it is altered in how it's developed?
So what I was talking to Mr. Tomez about before the meeting was that he told me a condition of the sale of the property, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but written in his contract was that Mostagassy would be following this same site plan and preliminary plat. And he did also tell me that the boulevard in its entirety is included, that area included in the sale to Mr. Mostagassy. So the actual new property line will have the thoroughfare on Mostagassy's property side.
So effectively, you guys can't develop until they build that. Is that?
The road would have to be there for us to have a successful plat. That's correct. And so
Well, and at this point, that's not part of the conditions. Part of the conditions is it's being built. So that's part of the confusion I think staff has, and that's where the recommendation for tabling or denial or whatever it may be might come up to get this clarified and redrawn and the conditions reestablished.
Yeah, I think, we would recommend that we table it to work these things out, because if you're saying a contingency to build that road, John may not have that availability as that land is transferred over, right? So.
That is correct.
Need to come up with an alternative. I will add on the C2 collector side though, for County Road 43. I hadn't heard, Andrew, you said today that 25% or of the property or 50% development of the lots will trigger the road to need to be constructed, but we're going to need a roadway access obviously way before that, just before even the first few lots are developed. So is there any, I may have not been in any discussions with the city staff on that. Is there any intention of something else occurring to access the site before the C2?
So this is Andrew, just to interject. Yes, so the three-way split, so to speak, between the county, the city, and the applicant to construct a county standard, meaning it would be a 22-foot wide pavement section with roadside ditches on each side to gain access. The 50% threshold was established to then upgrade. Once you hit 50%, you would need to upgrade that right of way to a full C1 collector.
Okay, understood.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, guys. I appreciate the comments. I will close the public hearing and just make a note that the applicant did request this to be tabled. So at this time, do I have a motion from Planning Commission or further comment?
This is Commissioner Schrader again. Andrew, is this the kind of thing that can be successfully worked out by tabling, or does this need to be resubmitted technically? Or does that start a whole new clock? Take much? I mean, I don't recall that we've encountered this particular type of situation.
It's definitely a unique situation. In all honesty, I think the two things that need to be worked out either by amendment or by resubmittal is to ensure that the connections for the wastewater agreement for the lift station are in place, and how the funding is going to be done for County Road 43, as now we've added a third party. So at some point, I'm assuming they will need to participate in funding the C1 collector. So until those two questions are worked out, whether by amendment or by resubmittal, that it adds a wrinkle, to say the least.
Okay.
Well, to clarify, if we do table, could they resubmit all this through, if it's tabled, could they resubmit with all that information?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Chairman. That's really what I was asking. I should have phrased it better.
No problem. All right, at this time, do I have a motion to consider?
I'll make a motion that we move to table this to allow the applicant time to resubmit or reconfigure the application in light of the recent transactions on the property.
And please,
This is Dan
that also
Dibble.
includes that also includes the waiving of the 30 days. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, do I have a second?
It's Dan Dibble. I'll second that motion.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to item 6. I'm sorry, moving on to item 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So moving on to item 7, this is a rezoning case 0221-03 Cardinal Investments and Holdings. It is a request from the FR Farm Rural District, and I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint for everyone. From the FR Farm Rural District to the RS6 Single Family District with a planned unit development of what we call PUD. So to quickly run through the PowerPoint, as you can see, this is an aerial view of the subject property. It is roughly located at the corner of, or I should say roughly, it is located at the corner of Ametrine Drive and Slough Road, which is to the east of the intersection of Rodfield Road and Slough Road, as you can see on the center of the screen. Here's a closer view of the subject property. So the property was originally annexed in 1995. It is, as you can see, the 4 properties are kind of the last vestige of FR zoning that exists in this entire subdivision. The subdivision pretty much is either zoned RS 4.5, RS 6, and there is a pocket about a quarter mile away where cottage housing development that was done by Brazelton Homes. So here on the zoning pattern map, as you can see, we identified the cottage housing, which is just down the street. We, again, a combination of RS 4.5 and RS 6 surrounding the site. And of course, the remaining pocket of FR back from annexation in 95. As far as buffer yards are concerned, as this at its base zoning is RS 6, it would not have a buffer yard requirement. The setbacks would be a standard of RS 6, 25 feet in the front, 5 on the sides and rear, 2 parking spaces per unit. As you can see, all the uses allowed in RS 6. Now, as far as utilities are concerned, there are all available utilities to the subject property, as this was a recent bond project completed, so it is brand new facilities. When it comes to public notification, of the 41 notices mailed out, we received 16 in opposition and 0 in favor. The 16 roughly constitutes almost 25%. If those who recall, I did read all of the opposition letters. No additional ones came in since the last meeting in which we discussed it. In summary, the public comment was addressing an increase in traffic, potentially invasions of privacy for those homes that border the property to the north, increase in noise, and an increase in density. I can reread if you would like. All of those notices were attached to the staff report that was distributed to planning commissioners. And again, they're the same notices that were read in at a previous planning commission hearing. Now, as far as PUD deviations are concerned, as you can see, there are quite a few. Now, this originally went to the technical review committee, of course, for their comment, and some feedback was given. So the original submission that was shown at the first planning commission hearing has changed and been updated to the benefit of the design based on TRC comments. So while we do have a reduction of course, the lot sizes to 3,500, we do have a reduction of the minimum lot width to 35 feet, which is typical of most townhouse style developments. Now, when it comes to the front yard of 18 feet, this was brought up by the TRC of potential concern of overhangs into sidewalks or right of way. So similarly to what we've done on a past PUD, within the PUD document that's attached to the staff report, we did add a condition that the garage door would need to be set at 20 feet to allow for vehicles to park without the concern for overhang. So while the structure can be at 18, the garage door must be set at 20. Now, as you can see, there was a reduction in side yards to 0. There was reduction for maximum height to none. However, there is a building code requirement that does limit single-family homes to roughly about 35 feet. So even if the zoning doesn't specifically put a limit, International Building Code will, or National Residential Code, I should say, will. And then lastly, the question that came up about parking and sidewalks. One of the conditions, as you'll see in the staff report, did require that there would be 4 parking spaces for each unit, 2 in the garage and then 2 in the driveway. So that creates 4. That is to also promote no on-street parking, which is another condition in the statement of the staff report, that there would be signage placed to advocate or to promote no on-street parking. It would have to be regulated by the HOA as this is a private street. And then lastly, there would be a single sidewalk along the east side of the private road, a 5-foot sidewalk. And that is reflected in the master site plan. So this will be a one-way road entering off of Slough and exiting onto Ametrine. There would be a 5-foot sidewalk along the eastern property line. While this is a 25-foot pavement section, there would be no on-street parking. And again, to promote that, each lot is going to have a total of 4 off-street spaces, 2 in the garage and 2 in the driveway. So here's a quick rendering to show what that would look like, submitted by the architect on the project, to give an idea of how the layout would look. Essentially, they are shared duplexes. And then based again on the submittal and looking at the types of development that are occurring in the area, the consistency with the future land use map, as well as the comprehensive plan, we are recommending approval, but it is with conditions. One, of course, that the first thing is the property must be consistent with their guidelines and master site plan. 2, when I spoke about the off-street parking spaces, that is clearly identified. 3, prohibition of on-street parking. 4, of course, is our coverall that this PUD does not exempt the development from any type of other UDC building or fire code requirement. And then lastly, the time limit in which a complete building application must be submitted within a year of approval by City Council. And if there are any questions regarding this, I'd be more than happy to address them.
Thank you, Andrew. At this time, are there any questions for staff regarding item 7?
Andrew, is there any reason why I was looking at the deviations, and I noted, in other words, a lot of the public comment is related to concerns about height of these, and I noticed in here the deviations, there is no maximum height listed. But yet they're proposing what appears to be single-story structures. I don't see any dormers or anything in these, so I'm presuming single-story structures, which is at least in that respect, is much more in keeping with the residential neighborhood scale. Was there any discussion about that in your meetings with the applicant?
Yes, there was a discussion in which the zoning wouldn't necessarily limit the height of the structures, but there are rules within the International Residential Code that caps height of single-family developments because of the addition of certain fire requirements. So I believe once you get above 35 feet in the residential code, you have to install a sprinkler system and other potential means of egress for fire. So while the Planning Commission can absolutely recommend that the 35 feet be reinstated, at no time did the applicant express that they would go to 3 stories or higher. It has always been at most 2 stories, but it is not out of the realm of reasonableness that Planning Commission say, we would like to reinstate that 35-foot cap, which is consistent with the base zoning district.
Thank you.
Andrew, just to clarify, part of your comments or conditions was meeting the current master site plan, which is shown here, which shows it 1 story. I mean, are they allowed to build 2-story, or do they have to adhere by this site plan, or is that just for layout purposes? Is what you're referring to?
Yes, sir. So thank you, Mr. Chair. These 2 are just simple renderings. The true master site plan is what you see on the screen currently, which is more like what I like to call, a diet plat or plat junior. It's essentially going to turn into the plat when that gets to that phase of the development. But what the governing document, which is the guidelines that was attached to the staff report, we can absolutely change or amend to say, no, you do have a maximum height of 35 feet if the planning commission so desires.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff?
Andrew,
Yeah,
this is Commissioner
Michael,
Miller.
go ahead. I'll wait for you.
Okay. Right now, Ametrine Drive is not constructed, correct?
Ametrine Drive, I am happy to say, is fully constructed. So the latest, and I drove it myself, it is a fully built out road along with Slough Road.
Okay, because their rendering still shows it as green space.
Right, it is, it's built sidewalks, it's a brand new street, it's a nice drive.
Okay, that pretty much answers my question. I was curious about fire and how that was going to work. And also on their renderings, and I know the renderings are just an empty promise at this point, but I noticed that the garages, are the street yard in front of the garage. That's the closest point at this point. So it would look like, I guess that's going to have to be a minimum of 20 feet from the face of the garage. Am I understanding that correct?
That is correct. So if you can see on the screen, from the edge of the property back to the garage door would have to be 20 feet.
Okay.
Between these 2 points.
And on the other side, that it goes from the sidewalk setback to the garage, correct?
That is correct. So imagine on this rendering, there's a 5 foot, what we call a pedestrian easement. They're not allowed to overhang into that pedestrian easement.
Yeah, Andrew, that was actually my question. This is Michael York, but on the PUD packet, it wasn't clear, or maybe I just missed it, that it looked like it just said 20-foot setback from the garage, but it didn't, I didn't see anything that said on the side with sidewalk that it would be 20 feet. So I guess in essence, it would be 25 feet from the property line. Is that written in there somewhere?
You are correct. It's not explicit, but the intent in the discussions is that there would be no impediment to either the right of way as a whole or to pedestrian traffic on the sidewalk.
Okay, I definitely think that should be, we could put that as, make sure the condition is listed. I also had a question on, you mentioned that just down the street, there's a cottage development. And so that's, I guess, similar, smaller homes. So it's more similar to this than traditional single family. I know in the Brazelton subdivision, they had a different street section as well, a skinnier street, but they had parking bump outs. So they had parallel parking bump outs on, I think, just on one side of the street. But I remember driving that subdivision and it was terrible. I mean, just packed with parking. Does staff feel like this is enough? I mean, there's going to be no parking here, and I know that's up to the HOA to enforce, but
I would say that the difference, and you're absolutely right. I'm familiar with that same development. They wanted to have a type of kind of grassy alleys, so that what they call to have a kind of a shared yard among all the units. I think the difference between that one and this one is that the increase of off-street parking spaces that are available for these units are much higher than what was available for the other development. The other development, I believe, only had a 1-car garage or maybe 2-car garage and a very shallow driveway. So there just wasn't enough room for persons that when they have, family and friends over, they're parking into the right of way, or, they buy jet skis or boats or trailers, and those are also overhanging or parked on the street itself. That's something we've learned our lesson from. So that difference is that, one, we're of course going to have the signage up, but two, there is an increase of the off-street parking spaces available on each unit.
okay. The other question I had is more of a general question, I guess, and this I think goes more towards the procedures when we get into PUDs, and this is something I've run into myself as a consultant working with clients doing a PUD. But when you have something like this, a lot of times with PUDs, you're trying to reduce the right of way, and so you end up with a skinnier street, skinnier right of way section. and you still have to fit utilities in there. And I don't, on the rendering, it looked like this may be concrete. I'm not sure. I know they said curb and gutter, but I don't know if this is concrete or not. But what I've run into is the city doesn't allow public utilities under private concrete streets. So with this being proposed as a private street and the pavement going to the edge of the private street right of way, has that been discussed? And I guess the reason I bring this up, and it's partly a comment for staff as well, because I think this is something that tends to get overlooked, or maybe needs to be reviewed is a better way to put it, during the zoning process. Because if right now, as I understand it, the plat is not allowed to be reviewed until the PUD is approved. But there could be potentially comments during platting about utilities that then would require changes to the PUD. In this case, for this particular PUD, have the utilities been discussed?
So thank you, Commissioner. So there wasn't a specific discussion about the materials used for the roadway. I went back through, as you were speaking through the design guidelines for the PUD, and it wasn't explicit to say it will use a specific type of material. It does state, as you mentioned, the curb type and the sidewalk and the pavement section, but it doesn't mention whether it be concrete or asphalt. That is something that you can absolutely make a condition that it must be a material that can be used for a public easement for replacement of water. But as the utility layout hasn't happened yet, unless they run the utilities along the back property lines or they put them in another location where it doesn't impact the right of way, that's another option to the applicant. But I know the applicant's on the line, and I'm sure he'll comment on that they just might not be there yet of where exactly utilities will be placed, but they will need to be aware that if it is concrete, that the water department is having trouble, of course, accessing.
Okay, well, no, I appreciate that, and I don't know that it needs to be a condition, and if the applicant's on the line, I think that is at the very least helpful to them, so they understand, what may happen if they try to propose concrete streets. So I think that's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff before I open the public hearing? Okay, at this time, I will open the public hearing for comment. Andrew, I know you had plenty of email comments that we read last time into the minutes, and we had them in our package. Do you have any other comments like that before I ask the applicant?
No additional comments were submitted, but again, just for the record, the gist of the comments, the most common comments, so to speak, were concerning density, potential impact to property values, privacy of those properties that border to the north of course, they state in so many words, they didn't want anyone looking to their backyard, and traffic. That was probably the number one concern of all of the comments submitted, both inside and out of the 200-foot notification area, was impacts to traffic. I would note that, of course, both Ametrine and Slough Road are C1 collectors. So they're specifically designed to funnel traffic, but to make it clear, those were the common comments submitted as part of the public outreach. But that's all that's been received for public comment wise, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments from the applicant?
Yes, I want to address several of those items. I guess, first of all, the most recent was having to do with the utilities. If you'll look closely at the plat, on each side, on the west side and east side, there is a utility easement provided, and that'd be where we would handle all the utilities. The second thing is, I guess, one of the things that I wanted to bring up was, I know we don't want to have parking on the street, and we would be happy to mark those areas that shouldn't have any parking as a fire lane or something like that. We can put red paint on the curb and gutter, mark that as a fire lane, so there's so that it's not nobody's parked there. But I have one request, I guess. The small lot that's called Lot 13 It's in the middle on the right hand, on the east side. That is a common area, and that's where people are going to go to pick up their mail. And I would request that we be allowed to have, say, 5-minute parking along lot 13 there. We can put a sign there and designate it as such, but you know, limited parking while somebody gets their mail and leaves. That would be I think an amenity to the people there, so they wouldn't have to walk all the way down to get their mail. Let's see. We do have, first of all, you know,
I said, we're gonna have a gate at 2.
well, we haven't shown the gate here, so, yeah. And so, let's see, well, the one thing that, you know, that kind of a major issue for us really, has to do with that 18-foot as opposed to the 20-foot setback to the garage. And we agree to that. We'll have to change our plat to reflect that, but it will be, on the west side, it'll be 20 feet from the street property line. And then it'll be 20 feet from the pedestrian easement on the other side. We'd rather have the square footage, but we understand that the 20 foot is important. So we don't argue with that. I think that's most of the elements that we wanted to discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Can you comment on the height of the buildings? Do you have
the
an
height,
issue with?
they're all planned to be single story, and we don't have any intention or plans at this point, and we would not be opposed to amending our proposal to be a 35-foot maximum.
Thank you, sir. Okay, at this time, do we have any other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, are there any other comments from the public on the phone?
No, sir, no one is on the line.
Thank you. At this time, I will close the public hearing and entertain a motion for further discussion on item 7.
This is Commissioner Miller. I had some concerns about, in the back of my mind, about, you know, either visitors or residents, you know, pulling up on the side of the road and running in to grab something out of the house, or somebody, you know, meeting somebody to pick something up and having a long stop and chat, and then all of a sudden you get a traffic jam if you've got 2 vehicles coming in opposing directions. And then, you know, Mr. Walker's comments about allowing vehicles to stop for a minimum or 5 minutes to run up and grab mail from the lot 13 pretty much confirmed my concerns. So I'm just a little bit concerned about that, and for that I'm probably going to be in opposition to this one.
Andrew, this is Michael York. I'm curious, maybe something that could help with Commissioner Miller's concerns, but I know in the past the traffic department has had, not had issue, but spoken about issues with the no parking signage, and basically that people just ignore it. I think that came up a lot during the Hammerhead discussions. Would it maybe be better if this had striping along it? And if the lot 13, you know, if that's something that we want to consider, maybe that, you know, everything else can have the red fire lane striping, but you have, you know, like a yellow stripe there, loading zone kind of thing, or something like that is what I'm thinking. Is that something that was discussed, or is that an option?
So two things. One, I would want to note that these are only 16 duplex or single family homes that are essentially duplexes. So imagine there's not going to be a significant amount of traffic generated by 16 homes in this pocket neighborhood. But as far as striping is concerned, you can absolutely request that as a condition, but I can tell you most of the pushback that we've had on previous PUDs when it comes to striping versus signage is that striping essentially has a negative impact to curb appeal when they're trying to sell the homes. That nobody wants to live on a block that has just this long red stripe along it. You can absolutely request it as a condition and see how it flows through council. And while, yes, people ignore signage just like they ignore speed limit signs, unfortunately, but it would be up to the HOA, as this is a private road, to enforce any type of negative impacts as far as persons parking more than 5 minutes to get their mail or having a stop and chat to keep that traffic moving.
This is Commissioner
Okay,
Schrader.
I appreciate that.
On a practical note, this particular proposed design, now granted, we're not approving that, but the fact that it is written into the PUD that these will be double garage and double parking spaces, in a way, it's self-policing in this particular configuration, because the residents effectively aren't going to allow street parking because it's going to block their driveway, or they're going to police it to some level. More than the ones that have been challenging, in my opinion, or more challenging, are the larger developments that have a little more frontage that between driveways, and that in my opinion, especially the ones that are designed to be or potentially Airbnb type rental potential, which certainly someone could do here, but again, the width of the driveway helps police that. So in some ways, in my opinion, I think that's the way this is laid out. It helps the cause over some of the other ones that we have dealt with in the past that have more frontage.
And I think the one-way helps as well. I know the one-way direction is a, there's won't be two-way traffic trying to get around, so. Okay, any other comments?
I didn't understand that. So it is one way?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Well, that makes me more comfortable. Sorry, I didn't understand that.
Any other comments for staff? At this time, do I have a motion for approval with conditions, or denial?
This is Michael York. I'll make a motion that we approve the PUD with the condition written in that the setback at the garages be 20 feet from either the private right-of-way line or the pedestrian easement where that applies.
Are there any other conditions with that, Michael, or was that your total?
Am I missing anything? Sorry, did we discuss others?
Sorry to interject. I think the height discussion came up, and the mailbox parking as requested by Mr. Walker.
And yeah, or the fire lane as well. Either one. Those are the three that were out there.
Fire lane was well, okay. Procedurally, I guess and I'm in the middle of a motion. Can I walk that back a little bit and ask a question?
Sure, we won't hold it against you. No problem.
Okay. Maybe we do have a little more discussion here. I'm the one that brought up the fire lane thing and striping versus parking. Either way, it has potential to get ignored. So I don't think it needs to be it's not something I'm going to propose. On the height, is that something, does anybody else have thoughts on that? About
this is Commissioner Schrader. I have concerns about allowing this unless, in other words, I always approach these things with, we're approving a zoning change. And so if we want that to stay within the context of the neighborhood, which appears that's the applicant that's their intent. And since we're approving the zoning change, which doesn't mean that it doesn't hold them to doing their specific development, I would like to see the height in there, restriction in there, because that fits the context around it. And that was central to several of the resident opposition notes.
Okay, and Andrew, can you remind me, was that 35 feet?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay,
You can stuff a 2-story in a 35-foot height restriction.
Yeah.
Would the applicant be amenable to, or can we limit it to, instead of a height restriction, to a single story?
Well, 35 feet is what caps all the neighbors. So I'm not trying to impose more on this than anything around
Yeah.
them.
I agree with that. I mean, if some of the comments I read simply said, we bought our home with the privacy of a farm field, and that's not something that we can help them with. This could be traditional RS 4.5, and they could have a 2-story home in their backyard.
Right.
On Andrew, on the applicant's request for the temporary parking in front of lot 13, was that something that staff has discussed at all? And I'm just curious about how we would, I guess, one, if staff discussed that or has any, comments on that, and then two, how exactly we would do that.
More than likely, it would be a small sign to say, temporary parking or 5-minute parking in front of the mailbox. No different than, I used to live off of Lipes around Cimarron, and that's a 2-lane road. And there are several shared mailboxes where somebody pulls off to the side, especially during school hours. It's very busy around Cappy. So you pull off to the side to get your mail. And sometimes some of those, even on that full wide right of way, people are still kind of jutting into traffic. So I don't think a 5-minute parking is unreasonable. It wasn't specifically discussed, but it is by no means an unreasonable request.
As far as the motion, I'm hesitant to put a limit on it. I'd like to leave some room for them to work it out. Do you have an issue with just a temporary parking signage?
That would be perfect. Temporary parking is fine.
Okay. All right, well, let me try this again then. I'll make a motion that we approve the PUD with the added conditions of a 20-foot setback at the garage from either the private right-of-way line or the pedestrian easement line, where applicable. The max building height of 35 foot and a condition to allow for temporary parking in front of lot 13, the common area.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
This is Commissioner Schrader, I'll second.
Thank you. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Chairman Ball,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Dibble, Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Zarcone,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner York,
Aye.
Commissioner Gonzalez, Commissioner Mandel is absent, Commissioner Salazar Garza,
Aye.
motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to future agenda items. Anything to be scheduled or items to be discussed? If not, director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Al Raymond, Director of Development Services. Several meetings ago, several commissioners asked when were we going to return to council chambers. As you know, the city manager and the mayor announced that a limited amount of the public would be allowed into council chambers starting June 8th. And Planning Commission will obviously be allowed in the chamber starting June 9th. So pretty soon here, we'll be able to see each other face to face. So I'm looking forward to that, and hopefully it'll be great to see the public again. So that's my report.
Thank you. All right. If there's nothing else at this time, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.